Hello, everyone. My name is John Sierra, and I am a Tolkien scholar, which means that I am very knowledgeable in the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, and you can ask me just about any question, and if I can't come back to you with an answer immediately, I'll do some research, and then I'll let you know. But anyway, this is my channel where I answer questions that people give me about The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, The Silmarillion, really all of those different things, J.R.R. Tolkien himself even, and I've been studying his works for most of my life, really. Most of my life. So, that being said, I have a lot of questions to get to, 21 questions to get to today, but if you have a question, you can go ahead to the comment section and ask, and I'm very good at answering those. But if you'd like to be featured in a video, especially if you think it's a good question that is too much to just get into in a quick YouTube comment and answer, you can go over to Quora. There is a link to my Quora in the description, and you can click on that, ask me any question you want. If you don't have an account, it's very easy to set one up. You could use your Google account, your Facebook account, your email, all sorts of things. It's very quick to set it up. Anyway, we're going to get to a reading, and I'm going to read you a little bit of Unfinished Tales today. And I have chosen a bit of The Quest of Erebor. The Quest of Erebor is an interesting tale where it's after the main events of Lord of the Rings. Before the return home, before the scouring of the Shire, and before Frodo sailed west. But it's after Sauron was destroyed, and Frodo is resting in Minas Tirith, and he's in a room with Gandalf and, I believe, Legolas and Gimli, and asking all sorts of questions about Bilbo and his quest, and what it was like from Gandalf's perspective, because what Bilbo wrote and what really happened are not the same thing. So I'm going to read a little bit of that. And this is Gandalf speaking here. You may think that Rivendell was out of his reach, but I did not think so. The state of things in the north was very bad. The kingdom under the mountain and the strong men of Dale were no more, to resist any force that Sauron might send to regain the northern passes in the mountains and the old lands of Angmar. There were only the dwarves of the Iron Hills, and behind them lay a desolation and a dragon. The dragon Sauron might use with terrible effect. Often I said to myself, I must find some means of dealing with Smaug, but a direct stroke against Dol Guldur is needed still more. We must disturb Sauron's plans. I must make the council see that. Those were my dark thoughts as I jogged along the road. I was tired, and I was going to the Shire for a short rest, after being away from it for more than 20 years. I thought that if I put it out of my mind for a while, I might perhaps find some way of dealing with these troubles, and so I did indeed, though I was not allowed to put them out of my mind. For just as I was nearing Bree, I was overtaken by Thorin Oakenshield, who lived there and then in exile, beyond the northwestern borders of the Shire. To my surprise, he spoke to me, and it was at that moment that the tide began to turn. He was troubled too, so troubled that he actually asked for my advice. So I went with him to the halls in the Blue Mountains, and I listened to his long tale. I soon understood that his heart was hot with brooding on his wrongs, and the loss of the treasure of his forefathers, and burdened too with the duty of revenge upon Smaug that he had inherited. Dwarves take such duties very seriously. I promised to help him if I could. I was as eager as he was to see the end of Smaug, but Thorin was for all plans of battle and war, as if he really were King Thorin II. And I could see no hope in that. So I left him and went off to the Shire, and I picked up the thread of news. It was a strange business. I did no more than follow the lead of chance, and made many mistakes on the way. Somehow I had been attracted by Bilbo long before, as a child and a young hobbit. He had not quite come of age when I had last seen him. He had stayed in my mind ever since, with his eagerness and his bright eyes and his love of tales and his questions about the wide world outside the Shire. As soon as I entered the Shire, I heard news of him. He was getting talked about, it seemed. Both his parents had died early for Shire folk, at about 80, and he had never married. He was already growing a bit queer, as they say, and went off for days by himself. He could be seen talking to strangers, even dwarves. Suddenly in my mind, these three things came together. The great dragon with his lust, and the keen hearing and scent, the sturdy, heavy-booted dwarves with their old burning grudge, and the quick, soft-footed hobbit. Sick at heart, I guessed, for a sight of the wide world. I laughed at myself, but I went off at once to have a look at Bilbo, to see what 20 years had done to him, and whether he was as promising as gossip seemed to make out. but he was not at home. They shook their heads in Hobbiton when I asked after him. Off again, said one hobbit. It was Hallman, the gardener, I believe. Off again. He'll go right off on one of these days if he isn't careful. Why, I asked him where he was going and when he would be back, and I don't know, he says, and then he looks at me queerly. It depends on if I meet any. Holman, he says. It's the elves' New Year tomorrow. A pity. And him so kind a body. You wouldn't find a better from the downs to the river. Better and better, I thought. I think I shall risk it. Time was getting short. I had to be with the White Council in August at the latest, or Saruman would have his way, and nothing would be done. And quite apart from greater matters that might prove fatal to the quest, the power in Dol Guldur would not leave any attempt on Erebor unhindered, unless he had something else to deal with. So I rode off back to Thorin in haste to tackle the difficult task of persuading him to put aside his lofty designs and go secretly and take Bilbo with him, without seeing Bilbo first. It was a mistake and nearly proved disastrous, for Bilbo had changed, of course. At least he was getting rather greedy and fat, and his old desires had dwindled down to a sort of private dream. Nothing could have been more dismaying than to find it actually in danger of coming true. He was altogether bewildered and made a complete fool of himself. Thorin would have left in a rage, but for another strange chance, which I will mention in a moment. So he goes on, to talk about how things happened at Bag End, and how he had gone to Dol Guldur and gotten Thrain's key and map of Erebor and learned about, the Ring of Power and all that. So, and he goes on to talk about, what it was like when an unexpected party happened, when they came to Bag End and they all met there. And you get sort of like Bilbo's version in The Hobbit, and this is Gandalf's version. And he says about Bilbo's version, well, that's a fiction. That's not really how it happened. Thorin was much nastier, And he says, wonders, was Bilbo just unaware of how rude Thorin was being to him and how dismissive Thorin was being to him, and how he was being treated so poorly? Or, in retrospect, was he trying to make Thorin look more noble and look better because they had become friends and Thorin had passed away? It could really go either way, and even Gandalf doesn't really know which way. Anyway, let's get to your questions. Okay, so speaking of The Hobbit, this first question is about that. It's from Stefan Christane, who asks, is the original version of The Hobbit still available for sale? If you mean the first edition, in which the text is a little bit different, yes, but only in the way that first editions are always available for sale. The Hobbit's first edition always seems to be on sale for the very high price that a book of its caliber and rarity can command. A quick eBay search that I did when I first got this question reveals that the price range can be anywhere from a few $100s for a 20th printing of the first edition to $50,000 for a first printing of the first edition. Of course, this edition is not in print any longer, nor should it be. If there were just two versions of The Hobbit out there, one of which directly contradicts The Lord of the Rings, that would create confusion. But there do seem to be people out there that make facsimiles of the original unedited version, the non-revised first edition, which you can get when printed for about $100, though I don't know what the quality is like, and I really don't know what the legality is like either. Anyway, next question. This one came in from Sean Patrick, who asks, from what I understand, Sauron still had a physical body during the main events of The Lord of the Rings. What did he look like? Was he confined to Mordor? He wasn't confined to Mordor. He chose to stay there, but he certainly wasn't confined there. We don't get a good description of Third Age Sauron. We just know that he isn't pleasant to look at, though he once was. Sauron is a shapeshifter, and he has taken a great many forms. As an Ainur, as an Ainu, I should say, that's the singular form, his true form is a spirit that the children of Iluvatar, meaning the elves and men, cannot clearly see. In the past, it was mentioned that most of the Ainur took forms to look a lot like elves, so he would look like an elf. Sauron also could take many forms. Other than that, he could be a great wolf, he could be a serpent, a vampire, a dark lord, quite a lot more. He would adapt fair forms when trying to appease or to seduce, and terrible forms when he was trying to intimidate. Sauron lost his ability to take a fair form after basically taking a biblical event straight to the head in Akalabeth. So in the Third Age, he was terrible to behold. Gollum described him as having a black hand that was missing a finger, but that's as close as we got to an actual description. I always personally imagined that he would look burned and blackened in that sense. But yeah, we really don't know what he looks like. And this is one of the cases where you're kind of expected to use your imagination. And with just like the blackened, burned hand with missing finger being the only thing to go by, you could imagine a great deal of things when it comes to Sauron, what he looked like. Gollum certainly was pretty freaked out by him. Okay, next question. Did J.R.R. Tolkien always plan for the Silmarillion to be a post-Lord of the Rings project? No, not always, but he accepted the reality of the situation eventually. Tolkien wished that the Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion would be published together as a single connected legend that he initially called the Saga of the Three Jewels and the Rings of Power. His publisher had other ideas about this. They were only interested in the Lord of the Rings. They were interested in the Lord of the Rings because it was a sequel to The Hobbit. And The Hobbit was a very, very successful novel. And they would not publish, at that time, the Silmarillion alongside it. Tolkien, he seemed a little bit depressed about this, if you read his letters. Particularly letter 131 greatly goes into this. But he continued to work on the Silmarillion, hoping that he would be able to publish it one day, though it seemed unlikely that he ever would have published it in his lifetime. Even if he lived as long as Elros Tar Miniatur, he probably would have kept reinventing it and revising it and tweaking it. Upon his death, Tolkien was working on yet another, what we would call in modern terms, a total reboot of the entire continuity, which you could read about in the book Morgoth's Ring. There's a section called Myths Transform that goes into that. But he never got past the outline phase of that. So, Tolkien was a procrastinator, and Tolkien was a perfectionist. And the Lord of the Rings, I mean, he would have kept working on that for his entire life. And that probably would have been published posthumously if he had his way. It was actually his good friend C.S. Lewis that would kind of push him, and he would say, this is great, but we need a story. And, in a way, if you think of Tolkien as giving birth to the Lord of the Rings, you could say that C.S. Lewis was the midwife in that situation. Okay, next question. Did Sauron have wings if he was an angel? Well, he could if he wanted to. I'll put it to you that way. Sauron was an Ainur, an angel, and this is like a biblical angel, not a pop culture angel. So they didn't really look like anything like a person with feathery wings. Their true form was spiritual and could not be seen by people, as I mentioned before. They could not be easily discerned by the children of Iluvatar. But they took forms like people, the firstborn people. So they looked like elves for the most part, but that was like clothes to them. It was, with an elf or with a man, there are two parts. There's the body and the soul. The body is called the Hroa, and the soul is called the Fea. But with the Ainur, which includes the Valar and the Maiar, their body is called a Fana. Because it's different. They're not bound to it, except if they're incarnated like we had with the wizards and such. But they could cast aside their Fana because it was like clothes to them. And just as you could take off all of your clothes and not be diminished as a person, the Ainur could take off their Fana and just be a spirit, and they're not diminished in any way. The Fana is not them. It's what they choose to present to the people of Aman and the people of Middle-Earth so that they could be seen. or they could cloak themselves in their own thoughts, forms of majesty and dread as they wish. That's what it says in the Silmarillion. So Sauron in the Silmarillion could turn into a winged vampire, and he could even fly. So he could have wings if he wished to. Now, after Akalabeth, his shape-shifting was more limited. He could no longer take a fair form. But Tolkien was not actually clear whether he could still be like a vampire or a werewolf or a serpent at that point, because he didn't really do much shape-shifting after that. But basically, for most of his existence, yes, if Sauron wanted to have wings, he could have wings, but that was, and he could even fly with those wings, but that was just his fauna. Okay, next question. When will the Silmarillion ever be available for movies and TV series? No, I don't know. Nobody knows the answer to that, really. The rights to the Silmarillion have never been sold, and the Tolkien estate seems to have no plans on doing so. I know I've heard some rumors that, to sort of course correct the Amazon television show, The Rings of Power, that the Tolkien estate may have given Amazon some limited rights to certain aspects of the Silmarillion for season 2. I don't really know if that's true. It's a rumor. Rumors sometimes turn out to be true, and sometimes they turn out to be false. To make films or TV shows without permission, it would have to be, the copyright would have to expire. And that's complicated because copyright laws vary from country to country, and they can change, and they've changed many times, and it's possible that the Tolkien estate could argue that Christopher Tolkien was an author. He really wasn't, he was an editor, but they could make the argument that he was an author of the work, which would extend the date further, because in the UK at least, copyright laws have it where it expires a certain amount of years after the death of the author. So it could be not when J.R.R. Tolkien expired, but when Christopher Tolkien expired, and then several years, after that. And of course, the laws could change. So we really don't know. Hopefully, we get to see something really, really great and really wonderful based on the Silmarillion, but we don't know. Okay, next question. This one came in from Peter Ramirez, who asks, was the meaning of Minas Tirith in Gondor intentionally to honor the tower at Tol Sirion, or was that just a coincidence of meaningful terminology? So for anybody who was wondering, there was a Minas Tirith in the First Age. It wasn't in Gondor. There was no Gondor just yet. It was in the north in Beleriand, and a tower called Minas Tirith, Tol Sirion, which is the Sirion River. There was a little island in the center of the river. It's a good question, and I would say that in this instance, you could make an argument that it goes either way, but I would say that it's a coincidence of meaningful terminology, as you say. Gondor had a tradition of, hold on, this song is completely unsuitable. I'm just gonna skip that. Sorry about that. I'm playing this playlist. I'm trying out different things because I kept getting copyright pings from some of the other music that I had been using, and they're supposed to be copyright free. So, but this is an artist I know is copyright free. Anyway, getting back to it, Gondor had this tradition of using Sindarin names for everything, and most of its citizens could speak Sindarin, as well as Adonaic, which was the language they took from Númenor. And this is due to their history. They were the faithful of Númenor. They were in friendship with the elves of Erisea. The original Minas Tirith, and Minas Tirith means Tower of the Guard. It was at Tol Sirion, and it was built by Finrod Felagund in the First Age. One could make an argument that they were naming their guard city in honor of that guard city, and there were great scholars in Gondor who could have known about the original Minas Tirith. However, there really are two big reasons why I would say it's a coincidence. The first is that Gondor's Minas Tirith was not originally even called that. It was Minas Ainur, which is Tower of the Sun. Its sister guard city was Minas Ithil, or Tower of the Moon. So when Minas Ithil fell, it became Minas Morgul, the Tower of Necromancy, and it was under Sauron's control. And this left Minas Tirith as the only guard city, so it was named accordingly, Minas Tirith, Tower of the Guard. The second reason that I would say that it's coincidence is that the First Age Minas Tirith fell. Sauron overtook it, and it became known as Tol Sirion, which means Isle of the Werewolves. And even after Sauron was driven from the island, the tower was not rebuilt, it was not restored. In losing Minas Ithil and being pushed back a bit, I don't think Gondor would want to rename their city after a tower that was lost to Sauron and never recovered. It seems like it would be kind of bad mojo for them. Good question, though. Okay, next question. This is another really good one. This came in from Elise Arnold, who asks, why are the loyal House of Bor not considered members of the Edain, especially because their fierce loyalty led to their utter annihilation? Good question. The reality is that the term Edain was given to the elves to specific men, and Bor and his followers were not among those. Now, we have to mention, Edain is simply the plural form of Adan. Adan means man, Edain means men. So all mortal men are technically Edain, because that's what it means. It means men, that's the name that that the elves gave to them. Orome gave a term to the elves. They were calling themselves the Quendi, and Orome came and called them the Eldar. And the singular of that is Elda. And that was meant to be all elves. He wasn't calling specific elves Eldar. He was saying that is his name for the elves, and the word elf and elves, in universe at least, are derived from Elda and Eldar, and it came to be associated, though, specifically with the elves that started the Great Journey. So Edain is technically a word that means all men, but it came to mean specific mortals, the ones who migrated into Beleriand during the Long Peace and joined into friendship with the elves. And most notably, there were the big three houses of the Edain. Men who did not come into Beleriand in this fashion were not called Edain by the elves. If they were from beyond Erebor, even past the Misty Mountains, they were called Easterlings. And the meaning of the word Easterling would change later, because the former Easterlings became known as the Wilder Men, and the Easterlings then referred to the Men of Rhûn. So Bor, he was an Adan, due to the fact that he was a mortal man, and Adan means man. But he was not called Adan, and his house was not called the Edain, because he did not come into Beleriand during the Long Peace, and he was an Easterling. He was honored, though. He was honored by the elves. According to the book The Lost Road and Other Writings, Bor wasn't even his real name. That was an epithet given to him by the elves, and it means faithful. This goes a long way to explain why an Easterling had a Sindarin name. So, there you have it. Okay, next question. Why was Gandalf the only one of the four good wizards to help the Fellowship? Well, he was the one that was available and was willing. I'll put it to you that way. That's not to say that the others didn't help in their own ways, but Gandalf was the hands-on type. He was the direct approach wizard. Now, we're not counting Saruman, obviously. You said four good wizards. Saruman turned against their cause, though he would argue otherwise. He has a different way of looking at things. But what of Radagast, Merenatar, and Romastano? Radagast vanished at some point. He wasn't found where he was usually found, and he just kind of fell out of history. We don't know why. My own thought is that he might have been ashamed that he was used by Saruman as a patsy to capture Gandalf, not to mention his own failure in keeping Saruman in line. One of his functions was to be a friend to Saruman and teach him the virtues of patience and humility. Now, obviously, Saruman was neither patient nor humble, and he spurned Radagast's friendship. He only played along long enough to learn how to speak to birds, which he used for evil. So Radagast may have felt some shame there at unknowingly contributing to Saruman's evil plans. Now, the Blue Wizards, they were just kind of too far away to render any direct aid to the Fellowship. They arrived in Middle-Earth during the Second Age, and they traveled to the far south and the far east of Middle-Earth. These were regions that were already conquered by Sauron. Saruman, when he first arrived, did something similar, but returned to the northwest. Basically, the Blue Wizards were, you would say, behind enemy lines during The Lord of the Rings. Tolkien initially said that they failed their task, but then later he changed his mind, and he said that they were actually important. and in the way that they were out there behind enemy lines fostering rebellions among the conquered and enslaved. Due to the machinations of the Blue Wizards, the Easterling forces were less than they would have been, otherwise they may have completely overrun Ravanian. Okay, next question. What was the fate of the Witch King after his defeat by Eowyn? Did he get destroyed, or did he simply dematerialize like the other Nazgul, except for Sauron? Well, we don't count Sauron in that, because Sauron's not Nazgul, but he died. He died, the Witch King. And he was already kind of dead, but now he was, like, really dead. It's important to remember that the Witch King and all of the Nazgul were mortal men. Not Sauron, though. Sauron's not a Nazgul, not a mortal man, but all of the Nazgul were mortal men. His life was unnaturally extended by the Rings of Power. That's what the problem is. That's why it's so dang loud. I just lowered the volume on that. I have the volume on the thing very low, but then I realized in my mixer it was kind of high. So I'm like, it seemed loud, so I just lowered it a bit. Not everything in this playlist is suitable, unfortunately. I think I'm going to, I think we're going to pick a different playlist here, because this isn't working out for me. I'm sorry, I've really been trying to find a permanent solution to the music, the backing music situation, but it has been an issue. The previous sort of tavern music that I was using, I was starting to get like copyright notices, and it wasn't anything bad, but it said copyright free, so I shouldn't have been getting that. So maybe we'll go with yeah, there really isn't a good choice here. I was hoping that we would be able to just use that. Okay, here's one that we could use. That's a little bit more suitable, and the volume's not so high. It was bothering me, and I hope it wasn't bothering you. We fixed that now. So yeah, the Nazgul were mortal men, and their lifespans were unnaturally extended by the Rings of Power and Sauron's dark magic. He persisted because the power of the Nine persisted, and the power of the Nine persisted because the One Ring persisted. He was a wraith. He was undead, perished in body, but anchored to the world by magic. This is what Tolkien referred to as Morgul magic or necromancy. When Merry stabbed him, a lot of his magic was undone, and Eowyn was able to slay him. Tolkien did once, at one point early in the writing, imagine that he didn't actually die here and would return. Initially, he would return at the Black Gate, only to be killed by Sam. And then at Samnath Naur, he would return there in a different version of Lord of the Rings, where Frodo would command him into the fire. But both of these ideas were abandoned, and he just died fully when Eowyn killed him. So he passed from the world. He went to where men go when they die, and I would imagine that Iluvatar would have some very serious questions for him. Okay, next question. Do you think it's possible that Shadowfax was a Maiar come to Middle-Earth, and so not frightened by the evil-winged creatures the Nazgul rode? Shadowfax is a horse. He's just an unusually noble one. Shadowfax was what was known as Maiaris, an exceptional race of horses of Rohan. They lived as long as men would live, and they would only bear royalty, though Gandalf managed through his own station as an Ainur. They're not Maiar, but they do have a connection to the Valar. Orome rode one such horse, and he was said to bring this race of horses to Middle-Earth. Shadowfax is exceptional even among the Maiaris, though remember that the Nazgul themselves also rode horses, and those horses were stolen from Rohan. So a horse being able to not flee in terror against the Nazgul, and it was the Nazgul itself, not the winged creatures, that was projecting the fear aura. It's not completely unheard of, it's just exceptional. Okay, next question. This one came in from John Thompson, who asks, after over 2,000 years of traveling Middle-earth, how would Gandalf's wisdom have compared to that of his Valar mentors? He was actually considered the wisest Maiar, wisest of the Maiar, I should say, before he came to Middle-earth. I think the wisdom of Olorin, who is Gandalf, already rivaled that of most of the Valar. Him going to Middle-earth was, of course, a learning experience, but more so than that, it was an application of what he knew. The Silmarillion, pretty early on, calls out Olorin as being the wisest of the Maiar, and in that same breath states how mysterious he is and how little about him the elves actually know. When he was sent to Middle-earth, or when the wizards were all sent to Middle-earth, LotR and Curumo, they were the volunteers. They immediately volunteered for the Istari project. Immediately, LotR wanted to take his friend Palando along with him. Manwë was looking for Olorin. He said, "Where's Olorin? He has to go." And he wasn't even interested, but he was made to go. He was important. He just didn't know it yet. Tolkien sometimes throws out words like wisest, and sometimes I kind of like, what? Because sometimes he says it about characters, it doesn't make sense. It makes a lot of sense for Gandalf. Celeborn is the one that mystifies me. He's always the wisest of the elves. I don't really see Celeborn's wisdom in practice very often. It's sort of an informed attribute. For the Valar, Tolkien states that Varda was the wisest. And while I agree that she is very wise, from what I see, I would say that the wisest of the Valar were Ulmo and Nienna. They would both be above Varda, in my opinion. That being said, not all of the Valar were known for great wisdom. Some were known for specific traits. Tolkien was known for his strength and his bravery. Nessa was known for being swift. I would say that Gandalf eclipses a good amount of them in wisdom, and that he was certainly wise enough to learn from several different Valar. Okay, next question. What is the time gap between the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings? That is an awkward question for me to answer, because the correct answer is there's no time gap at all. Oh, where is the Silmarillion? It's always right there. Did I put it? Oh, it's down here. Okay. Let me grab it. I'm going to need it to demonstrate the answer in practice here. So the Silmarillion begins with a section called Ainur Lindala. That's the first part right there. You see Ainur Lindala, page 3. And that's sort of the creation myth of Tolkien's world. And then it ends with a section called Of the Rings of Power in the Third Age. You can see that there. Page 273 of the Rings of Power in the Third Age. There's tables and genealogies and stuff like that after that, but basically that's the last chapter of it. And that's basically a very abridged version of The Lord of the Rings, which is told from Elrond's perspective. So the story of the Silmarillion goes from the creation myth of the Ainur and the world, and on through all three ages. The chapter previous to Of the Rings of Power in the Third Age would be a Calabeth, which is the downfall of Númenor, and that ends with a note about the Dunedain founding kingdoms in Middle-earth, Gondor, and Arnor, and how the elves can still sail west after the destruction of Númenor. Many of the chapters overlap each other in chronology, and it isn't strictly told in order. So the question is kind of impossible to truly answer, but I know what you're really looking for. The Morgoth stuff, Quenta Silmarillion. That was about 6,000 years before The Lord of the Rings. Okay, next question. Let's see. Oh, this is the one from the thumbnail. Were there any instances of men meeting the Valar or Maiar in Middle-earth according to the Silmarillion? Oh, yeah, there were. Some unfortunate men had the displeasure of meeting Melkor. The main one was Hurin, who sassed Melkor, including calling him Morgoth straight to his face. Hurin got his entire family cursed for his trouble. Melkor took him and he sat him upon a mountain of dead bodies, a literal mountain of dead bodies, and he had to watch him curse his family, and then he put him on the slopes of Thangorodrim and made him watch with magical vision the curse play out as his children's lives tore themselves apart. On a more positive note, Hurin's nephew Tur met Ulmo at the sea, and that went a lot better. Ulmo made Tur his messenger and his champion, and he sent him to Gondolin. As for the Maiar, we're not told of many direct meetings with men, just the unlucky ones that met Sauron. At least not until the last section of the book, which is of the Rings of Power in the Third Age, and then of course there are many men that would meet Gandalf or would meet Saruman. Okay. Alright, let's see. Next question. Is there any way to Batman prep versus Sauron and win? I like this question. If you really think about it, that's what Gandalf and Aragorn and Imrahil did. That's what happened, really. For it to be a Batman gambit, the Batman of the situation would have to know that beating Sauron is not relevant. You need to distract him while other things are going on. Beating Sauron would just delay his victory. He'd come back. Batman would spend that time doing research and how to prevent it from happening. And in this case, the Batman of the story is Gandalf. And along with the captains of the West, he stood at war with Sauron's forces, distracting him while Frodo and Sam got to Urodrin to destroy the One Ring. That's what really mattered. So you could almost see it where, Sauron is like, I've won, and Batman's like, have you? And then he gets blown away by the wind, and except Batman is Gandalf. The reign of Sauron is over, Okay. Next question is another quick one. Can you explain the difference between Tolkien's Middle-Earth and Númenor? Is Númenor a real or imaginary place? If it is real, why didn't they go to war with Sauron like they did with Morgoth? Well, Númenor came after Morgoth. It didn't exist when Morgoth was around. But to put it simply, really, Middle-Earth is Europe. I will clarify that in a second, but Middle-Earth is Europe. Númenor was Atlantis. Middle-Earth is a supercontinent that is roughly analogous to Europe, Africa, and Asia. The section of Middle-Earth that we see on the typical maps, like in The Lord of the Rings, is the northwesternmost part of that supercontinent. It's Europe. The Shire is England. Hobbiton is Oxford. Mount Doom is roughly in Sarajevo. Mirkwood is Germany's Black Forest. Gondor is Italy, and so on. Númenor was a smaller island continent to the southwest of Middle-Earth. It was near enough to the Undying Lands that on a clear day they could see Erisea. It was destroyed in the Second Age by Iluvatar in an event called Akalabeth. Númenor is essentially Plato's hypothetical Atlantis, to the point where in Quenya its name became Atalanta, which means the downtrodden. Okay, next question. All right. Given that elves, after they die, are sent to Mandos to chill a bit and given new bodies, wasn't the kinslaying more really rude than evil? No, it was definitely evil. The kinslaying was a huge issue because it was violent and it was unjust. Feanor had no rights to the ships of the Falmari, and the Falmari were correct in not helping the Noldor, but instead trying to give them counsel. Now, before I get any disingenuous comments that I sometimes get about, well, the Falmari committed the first kinslaying. No, not at all. They knocked some of the Noldor into the water while they were fighting. They were struggling to protect their ships. Nowhere was it stated that those elves that fell into the water died. They didn't drown. It was at a harbor. Even if they were weighed down with armor, they weren't far from the shore. But I digress. The doom of Mandos spelled it out. They spilled blood unjustly. They stained the Undying Lands with blood and the strife of kin-on-kin violence. Feanor had already been put in a bit of a timeout for threatening Fingolfin with a sword. He was quick to anger. He was quick to violence, and his people were the only ones to make arms and armor in a land that was supposed to be free of violence. While death may be an inconvenience for the elves, it's still a painful inconvenience, an embarrassing and humiliating inconvenience, a time-consuming inconvenience, and they often acted otherwise, as if And if we account for the elves knowing that they could not truly die, as it was mentioned directly in the Doom of Mandos, that they cannot really truly die, but only be temporarily slain, Feanor shows a surprising lack of wisdom and clarity. His father wasn't really dead, he was in Mandos. The Valar wouldn't really let Melkor get away with anything. They needed time to formulate a plan. Feanor was saddled with a terrible burden to prove himself as legitimate, and it led to anyone getting in his way to be cut down. His monstrous pride and arrogance and his fixation on the Silmarils, because it wasn't really about his father, led to all the strife of the First Age. And of course, it was all from his mind being poisoned by Melkor. Okay, next question. This is a quick one. Did Sauron have any plans to directly attack and destroy the Shire? Yeah, eventually, yeah, he would have. Gandalf mentioned to Frodo that previously Sauron didn't know about the existence of the Shire. He didn't know what a Hobbit was. But now that he knew, he was not going to forget. He also mentioned that if Sauron ever recovered the One Ring, he would torment those who kept it from him. Sauron's forces were coming from more than just Mordor, but also the East in general. During the final battle, the Eastern forces were locked in battle with Dale and with Erebor, and the bravery of the late Kings Brand and Dain II stopped them, and Sauron's defeat made the Easterlings eventually just give up and turn around and go home. If Sauron had his way and the ring had been destroyed, not been destroyed, but recovered, his forces would have swept to the west, destroying all resistance and driving the surviving elves to Lindon, where they would be forced to flee Middle-earth. They would have to get on ships and leave. What's between the Misty Mountains and Lindon? Erebor. What's part of Erebor? The Shire. They would not be spared. Okay. Next question. Did Tolkien consciously express philosophies in The Lord of the Rings, or was it meant to be a straight-out epic adventure? This one came in from Margaret Johnson, by the way. I would say he did not express philosophy. He expressed lessons. Tolkien did not trust literature that espoused philosophy through hidden meanings. That's what's known as allegory. He did state that there are some things that can only be expressed allegorically. An example of Tolkien using allegory could be seen in the story Leaf by Niggle. Leaf by Niggle is an allegory about his own creative process and how his plans for a grand story were represented as a painting by Niggle. That he was very good at drawing a leaf. He drew a leaf, it became a tree. And then there were birds, and there were creatures, and then there were other trees, and it was a forest, and there was a village and mountains, and it was this grand painting. By the end of the story, the only surviving part of the painting is the leaf. A leaf by Niggle. And if you think of it, the leaf is the Lord of the Rings, and everything else is the Silmarillion. Now, of course, we did get to see the rest of it eventually. After Tolkien died, it was reconstructed by another person, his son, but it was never really finished. For most of his work, he did not use allegory, but he did consider his works not to be philosophical or theological, as some like to claim, but literary and didactic. For the first part, for literary, it means that it really is just a story. For the second part, it can be educational, but with a caveat. Tolkien championed what he called freedom of the reader, and he was very big on explaining that while he did not use allegory, those who claim he did are mistaking allegory for application. He was often asked, is The Lord of the Rings an allegory for this war or that war? And he said, no, it's not an allegory for any war, but you could apply it that way if you wish. The freedom of the reader means that the author's intent is clear, but the reader can take lessons from it and apply them in different ways to various aspects of their lives. Tolkien also felt that he was being too self-important in calling his work didactic, but that was indeed his intention. Okay, next question. This one came in from the Oski Boski, who asks, did Eru create anything before the Ainur? Maybe, if we consider the void to be nothingness that doesn't need creation, then there are two things that would maybe perhaps be created before the Ainur. The first thing would be the flame imperishable, also known as the secret fire. This is the light of creation, and it's what he used to kindle the lives of the Ainur. Of course, one might say that the flame is actually an innate part of Iluvatar, but he was able to separate it from himself because he imparted it into the heart of Arda. So, put that in the maybe pile. The other thing that would go into the maybe pile would be the timeless halls, the location where the Ainur Landala happened, where he resided and the Ainur resided. This would be so that they weren't just, I guess, floating in nothingness. Other than that, there's nothing that he would likely have created before the Ainur, at least not anything that was mentioned in Tolkien's works or supported by them. Okay. Next question. What was Bilbo's occupation besides being a burglar? Bilbo's job was being rich. That was his only job. Bilbo was a wealthy person before leaving on his journey. He just became even more fabulously wealthy afterwards. His father was Bungo Baggins, and he had a lot of money, and his mother was Belladonna Baggins, Nee Took, and she had even more money. Bilbo was an only child, and he didn't have anyone to share his inheritance with, so he had the best house in Hobbiton. He had a lot of money. He was a gentleman of leisure, meaning that he could do whatever he wanted. He could sit and have tea, walk the countryside, look at the garden, chat up the neighbors, read books and maps. He had nothing to worry about. And finally, last question here. How long did it take to get through this, by the way? I can't actually see my timer. Oh, wow, we got through. Well, like I said, I did pick quicker questions this time, but did Bilbo not take a sword for a specific reason? So assuming you mean when he left on his journey, he just sort of left. He didn't take a sword with him. He didn't likely own a sword. Bilbo was rushed out of his house by Gandalf, and then he ran all the way to the Green Dragon. He didn't have time to get most of his things, even when leaving without his walking stick and his cloak, and more important to him at least, his pipe and his pipe weed. Gandalf brought most of that for him when they met up at the tavern. Bilbo probably didn't own a sword. It was said that when he was young, he dreamed of being a dashing adventurer who had a sword instead of a walking stick. But remember the reading from the beginning of the video. He had grown greedy and fat. Later on, when the chance presented itself, he took a small dagger of Gondolin, which for a hobbit, a small dagger might as well be a short sword, and he named it Sting after using it to kill spiders in Mirkwood. So that's where he got his sword later on in the story. He likely didn't have one before then. Anyway, that was the last question, and leave me some comments. Engagement is what really matters here. We're going to be a little goal-oriented here. We are on the road to 500 subscribers, because that is when I'm going to be able to unlock some features on YouTube here. As a matter of fact, let me just go here real quick. We have gotten an achievement, by the way, that 3 weeks ago I got the achievement for 10,000 views globally, so I thank you much for that. And we got the achievement for 300 subscribers just 12 days ago. So the goal here is to reach 500. Okay, that's our first goal, to reach 500 subscribers. And I'm going to ask you guys to help me out there. We're currently at 353, so we're almost all the way there. To unlock this first tier towards becoming YouTube partner and getting bigger in the algorithm and everything, we need to have 3 video uploads, certainly have that, and 500 subscribers, and then to have 3,000 watch hours, which we have, or public shorts videos. I don't do shorts, but we have all the watch hours, we have the video uploads, we just need the subscribers. We're getting there, so that's going to be our first goal. So let's make a push, guys, for 500 subscribers. If you haven't subscribed, well, why not? You're at 47 minutes and 50 seconds into the video. If you've watched this whole thing, you must have liked it. Give me a like and subscribe if you haven't. Leave me some comments. Share the video if you can. Anybody that you know that likes Tolkien, they're into The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings or whatever. I will see you guys next time.